Hello, you are on the Stories by the Fireplace channel. Make yourself comfortable. Enjoy listening to it. Mary, what are we having for dinner? It smells great. I'm drooling all over your couch, Hank complained. He was a stately, tall, broad-shouldered man of 53 years of major, an influential face, a respected veteran man. He had been wounded quite recently. Friends and relatives had long said, "You should be in the office, Hank, rubbing your pants." But he didn't listen to anybody and continued going to training exercises, brought up young soldiers, organized exercises at the training range, and was jumping with a parachute. So he got a serious injury during the next training session. Now he was sitting on the sofa for a year and got fat at first, but not very much. Thanks to the chinning bar in the yard, nobody cancelled it. He went out every morning to train in order not to lose his form. His body demanded exercise. Neighbors admired his form and set an example to everybody. He did not drink, except during holidays, did not smoke, and dusted off his wife. But they had no children. When they got married, Garrick started going on regular business trips. Mary was ill, poorly adapted, but heroically endured all hardships and went with her man to wherever he was sent. Soon everything will be ready, but the spit-up couch will be on your conscience. She smiled as she peered into the room. His wife was 49. She had never really wanted children, but over the years it had become important to her. When she was young, because of her asthma and allergies to everything she could, she had never decided to have a child, even though Hank had asked for one. He was then steadily withdrawing once a year and realized he just couldn't demand that his wife make that sacrifice, given the circumstances. When they were in their 40s, they honestly got tested and tried to conceive, but it didn't work out. They didn't dare to have an artificial one. Concussion and a serious foot injury prevented Hank for a long time. Mary helped him with everything. Immediately after retirement, when he was discharged from the hospital and found himself at home within 4 walls with a spoke in his leg and no desire to live, she showed him motivational films every day, fed him delicious food, and on weekends took him to the countryside. He would walk on crutches, and Mary would drive him to the same place on a cliff where he had a great view. There was a wonderful lake, trees, and the sky touched the ground. In the city, people so often miss the horizon. She gave him back his desire to live and yet remained his most beloved. Hank greatly appreciated her and was proud that he had only had one woman in his entire life. He had never said, "I love" to anyone but Mary. Suddenly, the usual atmosphere in the apartment was broken by the doorbell. Eagle got up and went to the door. There was a boy standing at the door. "Hello, what do you want?" he asked as gently as possible. The sight of the huge militant made the child back away, but he didn't run away. "You smell so good, mister, and I'm so hungry. I'd like something to eat, just a little bit, please," Hank frowned. "Come in, kid, come in." He let the child into the house and, while he undressed, asked him where he was from and where his parents were. "I don't have a daddy, he's in the army, and my mom's license was taken away by some bad uncles. I'm worried about her. She's sick, so I run to her every day. She lives here, on the top floor of your staircase." Mary came out of the kitchen and saw the guests. She smiled. "Oh, is it that's here to see us?" "My name is Irvin," he answered. "Mary, give him something to eat. The boy is hungry." The wife went to the kitchen without understanding anything. "It is not a pity. We were not hungry, and even if we were hungry for a child, it is not a pity." Irvin washed his hands in the bathroom, where Hank had taken him, and sat down at the table. The 2 adults were staring at the kid, who was gorging on the vegetable stew with great appetite. "Irvin, why don't you tell me why your mother got her license suspended? She must have been a hard drinker, Nest's part." Irvin frowned, but didn't stop chewing. "No, my mom wasn't like the other kids in the orphanage. She had a fight with some powerful uncle, and he made sure they took me away from her. I had just recently been living there. I wasn't used to it yet. My mother visited me every day. We never parted from each other. And then she got sick, and I got worried and ran to her. She's pretty sick, says she's better, but I can tell. I ran out before dinner. I got dizzy from hunger, so I asked to see you. I'm sorry. You're just a child, and you're talking like an adult. Mary and Hank looked at each other. The wife wiped away a tear. How old are you? I'm 6. I'll be 7 soon, and I'm going to school. I just don't know where. I hope my mom will get better and will be able to take me to school herself, pick me up from there every day. I miss my mom, she's nice. Hank didn't know how to respond to this, but he knew for sure he wouldn't be indifferent. As the kid chewed, he kept squinting at Hank. He thought at first that he looked too big and mean to the kid. As a true military man, Hank looked menacing. Big, tall, muscular. At home, he wore a striped vest that shamelessly exposed his solid, massive shoulders. His head had grown bald over the years, the edges of his skull bulging at sharp angles. Hank's face was kind, but the baldness made it more brutal. Plus, of course, the scar on his face. A blow to the temple nearly fractured his skull. The severe concussion left him with not only intermittent headaches, but a thick white stripe from his forehead to his cheek across his temple. I don't know your mother. How long has she lived here? Asked Mary, going over all the neighbors in her head. She moved in a while ago, and an old lady rents her apartment on the 5th floor. 51st apartment. We have our own, but it's in the Zavodsky district of town, and it's a long drive from here. My mom rented our apartment to someone to visit me. She rents it here. And she changed her job, just to be closer to May. My heart once again gave a little tingle. Hank and Mary waited until the child was full and started to collect food for him. No, thank you. You've fed me enough, said the precocious Irvin. Mary put a lot of sweets and various delicacies with him, and Hank warmed up the car to take the child to the orphanage. At the doorstep, as the boy was getting dressed, he cast another long look at Hank and, digging in his pocket, pulled out pictures. You look just like this man. He's my grandfather, that's what my mother said. In his hand were a few more pictures of other people. Irvin showed me what his mother looked like. Her picture was faded. Apparently, the child didn't let it out of his hands. Mary, looking at the picture, gave it to her husband, and his eyes went over his bald head to the top of his head. Where did you get that? I told you, my mother gave it to me. She said it was my father, and here's my grandmother. Only she's gone. He showed me a picture of a young woman, black and white. Hank twisted the picture in his hands and shrugged. I don't know who that is, and I've never seen your mother, but this is definitely my picture. So you're my grandfather, smiled the child. Mary looked at her husband, full of resentment and incomprehension. There was pain in her eyes. She had followed her husband all over the country all her life, remained childless also because of frequent removals, which bruised her health, and he had got someone on the side. Hank, on the other hand, thought what was happening was some kind of ridiculous joke, a practical joke. How was it possible for a kid to come into their house and start showing the pictures he was carrying? It was as if someone wanted to set him up. Nevertheless, Hank took the kid to the orphanage. The boy told him to stay outside the gate. It was important to him that no one find out he was running away, otherwise he would be watched more closely. Hank insisted, but Irvin begged him not to go with him, saying that otherwise they would not see his mother soon. After all, she was very sick and couldn't come to see him. From there, Hank returned home. It was late, and it didn't seem right to go to his neighbor's house. If she was sick, she was probably asleep by now. The evening at Hank and Mary's house was spent in an atmosphere of hostility and mistrust. There had never been anything like it. They had never had a jealous argument before. They went to bed back to back. Hank said nothing. What was there to prove? Why make excuses? It wasn't his fault, and he knew it. He had no other women, but that picture belonged to him. Yet he could not remember to whom he had given it. Probably one of his army friends might have had it. There used to be a tradition of giving each other pictures as keepsakes, except they were usually signed, and this one was blank on the back. With these thoughts he fell asleep. The morning began, as usual, with breakfast and a bar. Outside the window it was nasty. Rain, snow, wind, slush, all the delights of early spring. The boy was on his mind. Hank took a shower, got dressed, and went out to the kitchen. Mary never said another word to him. He didn't say another word to her either. Get dressed and let's go. Where? She asked, knowing exactly where. 51. Maybe the man needs some help. Let's find out about the photo too. They started to walk up the stairs. A shabby staircase, dirty, cold and musty dark. Hank pressed the bell. Silence. He was answered on the third time. There was a woman standing at the threshold. Very pale, she was holding her stomach. My God, what is the matter with you? Hank was horrified. The landlady wanted to say something, but fainted right in front of him. Mary, doctors, run. While his wife called the doctors, they laid the young woman on the couch. She regained consciousness, but only for seconds. The fever was very high. Hank noticed the pills on the nightstand. His greatest fear was that he would be the one who would have to tell the boy that his mother was dead the next time he ran to her. The doctors arrived quickly, much faster than usual. A man in a white coat examined the stranger, pressed on her stomach, and she cried out in great pain and lost consciousness again. There was a large bruise on her abdomen. Is it cancer? Why is she in so much pain? Mary was horrified. It is a fracture of the ribs. It's probably the lungs. The inflammation hasn't been controlled by anything. It's a good thing it didn't get infected. Why are you so late? The girl was placed on a stretcher and carried away. Hank did not know what to say, but was worried about her, as if she could really be his daughter. Mary was no longer angry. She was worried about Irvin's mother too. I'll go with them, Hank said. Mary nodded to him. They left, and she stayed. She had already decided everything for herself. If Irvin was Hank's grandson, then he was her grandson too. She would not leave him, even if she found out that he had 100 children on the side. That was how she loved the man. Mary was well aware that men like Hank are rare. There are hardly any left. Hank shook in the car for a long time. While the doctors were in the apartment interviewing the woman's data, Mary found her bag, and in it were all the necessary documents. Hank knew from it alone that the woman's name was Rebecca. Rebecca, he repeated as if casually, and Mary lowered her eyes. This did not prove anything, of course, but it was already some sign that her husband was being honest with her. They rolled the woman out of the waiting room very quickly and rushed her straight to the intensive care unit. Will she live? Asked Hank, anxious as if she were the closest thing he had to family at that second. Wait here. The doctors shoved him away, doing their job as they went. She must live. She has a little son. He loves her very much, shouted Hank as the doctors slammed the door to the ICU behind them. The surgery lasted about 40 minutes, but Hank felt like he had been waiting forever. The doctor came out of the room and wearily removed his mask. How is she? Jumped Hank, feeling himself shaking with fear inside. He had skydived calmly, afraid of nothing, and never, he would have died for her now, not even knowing this woman. Only if that boy didn't have to experience the grief that he himself had once experienced. At the age of 11, Hank lost his mother. It was a terrible tragedy for him, from which he has not recovered even to this day. She's alive. She'll live if her body can take it. She was almost septic. A little more and she would have died. It's a simple rib fracture. Why didn't she come in right away? It's a couple of weeks old, that's for sure. There's tissue in the rib, in the lung, and there's fluid build-up. It'll heal, of course. I think he'll be fine." "Are you the father?" Hank didn't know what to say. "Yes, I am." "Here's the deal. Bring your personal belongings, and she'll be in the general ward in a couple of days. They need a kettle or kettle boilers, clothes, slippers. Take warm clothes. It can be chilly here. It depends where they put you. We have our own bed linen, but take dishes, toiletries. They have to be rinsed, and the seams have to be treated. So buy a spray. I'll tell you what kind." Hank memorized everything the doctor said. "Can I talk to her?" he asked. "No, not today. Come back tomorrow. Let her rest for now. She seems to be in a lot of pain. Still, I don't understand why you didn't send her to the hospital. You didn't see her condition. How was she injured?" Hank was at a loss. "I just came to see her. I didn't know." The doctor sighed. He clearly saw him as a bad, irresponsible father who didn't care about his daughter, albeit an adult. Hank went back to Mary, and she began to gather everything on the list in her apartment. She was glad the woman had survived. "She and I are the same size. I'll put this robe on her. What do you think?" she asked her husband. "Shouldn't we go to her and pack her things?" Hank hesitated. "Whatever you want, but I will not go rummaging through someone else's apartment." Mary is still reeling from that story, but she'd already spoken to her husband. He came back from the hospital older. She understood that he was deeply worried. Toward evening, the bell rang in their apartment. Hank saw through the peephole again and opened it, letting Irvin in. He was choking back tears. "My mother must be dead. She's not in the apartment, and there's no key," he said, sobbing profusely. Hank picked him up with his big hands and lifted him so that his eyes were level with his eyes. "What makes you say that?" he asked, smiling. "I went to see her today. They took her to the hospital and operated on her. The doctor said she would be all right." "Really?" the child asked, not stopping crying, and Mary showed up behind her. "If your mother is Rebecca, then it's true," she said. Irvin stopped crying and nodded. Hank put him on the floor and told him to go to the table. "What are the orphanage teachers doing? We should sue them. The child is 6 years old and he walks around town alone," Mary whispered as the boy washed his hands. "They don't look anywhere, the bastards," Hank said as he took his wife's hand. She smiled. It was the first time in days that he had squeezed her delicate hand with his large hand. Mary was a very thin, blonde woman who was to her age. She had walked around with a straight ponytail all her life. Her hair was thin, no bangs, always a straight parting. Blonde eyebrows, blue eyes, and a charming smile. Mary was pretty, but she did not strive for outward beauty. She was a librarian and loved reading more than anything. Sometimes it seemed to Hank that she loved reading even more than she loved him. Irvin was well fed again. At dinner he told them a little more about his mother. "So how did she get hurt? You said she was sick. Why didn't she go to the hospital?" asked Hank. "Mom was attacked 2 weeks ago on her way home from work. She got a job at the store as a clerk and was working late. She was mugged, robbed, threatened. And she didn't go to the police. She gave me all the money she had. I even brought her food from the orphanage. I stole bread and potatoes, and she was new at work. So when the boss found out she couldn't come in for her shift, he got mad and fired her and didn't even pay her for the time she worked." "Okay, she was afraid to go to the police. Why didn't she go to the hospital?" asked Mary. "She went to the doctor's office. Some machine that takes pictures of broken bones wasn't working. They told her to take a picture at the fee-paying hospital and come back later. And my mom didn't have any money. She said it would go away anyway, so she treated herself with pills." Hank shook his head. "What is it about mothers that they just take away their parental rights? Criminals take the last of the poor, and then they are afraid to go to the police, and the hospitals do nothing to help them. It's just an outrage. He slammed his fist on the chair. Mary shuddered, and Irvin hit the table in the same way, with all his might. I don't get it either, he said sternly, and Mary couldn't help smiling. Hank looked at the child with great tenderness in his eyes. Come on, buddy, I'll take you before you get into trouble. I promise I won't turn you into childcare. And tomorrow, if you manage to sneak out, come straight to me. We'll go with you to your mom's. They didn't let me in today, but they'll let me in tomorrow. And he went to warm up the car. After 24 hours, Irvin knocked on the door again. Mary opened it cordially, never ceasing to marvel at the way he left the shelter whenever he pleased. Of course, first she sat the boy down at the table. Then he went with Hank to the hospital to visit his mother. There, outside the room, sitting in his mask, shoe covers and gown, Hank held Irvin's hand, and he was very worried. The doctor came out and removed his glasses when he saw the two visitors at a time when visits were already forbidden. Where are you going? There are certain visiting hours. You didn't know. Excuse me, doctor. It's Rebecca's son. The boy can't come at any other time. We explained everything at the post and they let him in. He's in a private boarding school. The doctor looked at the child. There was determination in Irvin's eyes. He was already here, and he would still make his way to the ward, even if he had to run through the doctor. If he ran away from the orphanage, no doctor could stop him. Go ahead, kid. Just don't touch anything in the room. Your mother's getting treatment now. Irvin went into the room, and Hank got up to ask him some questions. Tell me, is she feeling better? He asked. Yes, considerably. She told us everything. It turns out that Rebecca was attached to the 5th hospital, and everything there is always out of order, and the staff is terribly rude, almost spitting in people's faces. She was referred to a paid X-ray, and she could not pay. So she stayed home. She kept waiting for it to go away on its own. I see you're not too close to your daughter. She never told me about you, and when I told her Daddy was here, she was surprised. Hank nodded. Yes, we're not close at all. Honestly, will fix that. Now you have that chance. Your daughter will get better. Hank honestly waited for Irvin to leave the room. He stayed with his mother for almost an hour, coming out happier than ever. Shall we go? He asked cheerfully. Wait, I want to talk to your mom too. Hank went inside and saw Rebecca. Today, she was no longer as pale as the last time, and she was even smiling. Hello. Irvin said you saved me. It was you to the doctor my father introduced himself, she asked. Hank walked over to her bedside. She looked smiling and friendly. Right. Thank you so much for my son and for me. I kept thinking I had a cold and my ribs were aching from the fever and the aches, but it turned out to be a serious fracture. The doctor said I owe you my life. Thank you. If there's anything I can do to repay you. Hank frowned. He hovered over her, so big and strong, and it was even embarrassing. So he spotted a chair next to her and took a seat. Rebecca, I have a lot of questions for you, but I'll start with the main one. Your son showed me a photograph of me. He said it was a picture of your father. How did my picture get to you? I can't be your father, but it's definitely mine. You can see my tattoo too. The woman looked closely at his face. That's who you remind me of. Of course it is. She was silent for a long time, and Hank didn't know what was happening to her, and she just looked at him. Rebecca, my wife, saw the picture too, and she had her doubts, you know. I should know what to tell her about the picture. Your wife has nothing to worry about. It's not really my daddy's picture. He was in the military. A fellow soldier gave him this card. After the army, he was in a hot spot, fought there for a few years. That's when he met my mom. He got her pregnant, and he wanted to go there one last time to bid farewell to his career as a soldier and earn money for the wedding. She was already pregnant with me. Mom really begged him not to go there anymore. But Dad had already agreed and couldn't let people down. Dad was very obliging and faithful. Before he left, Daddy gave Mom a picture and told her to find the man in the picture. He said you came from a small village and people there would recognize you from the picture. He said you would help if anything happened. On the back of the picture was your signature. Rebecca looked at Hank and saw that he was crying. A tear ran down his stern, masculine face. It said, "To my best friend Aaron from Hank, I'm always with you. I can't believe I didn't remember that. That's not your last name. If only I'd known you were Aaron's daughter." Dad never came back from the service that time. They buried him in a closed coffin. He remembered when he heard her voice, saw exactly how she spoke, the way she got a lisp, not clearly pronouncing the letter R. He should have known at once where the boy had gotten that picture and whose daughter she was. The caption on the photo, "She wasn't there, suddenly realized Aaron." The picture had deteriorated, faded over time. I went to a salon and they made me a copy. They restored it, made it clearer. The photo with the signature is in our photo album. My mother treasured it all her life. She didn't have any pictures of her father, unfortunately. And she used to say when I was little that you were my daddy. And when I grew up, she told me that it wasn't his. Hank stepped back to the window, manfully sniffing his nose. Outside the window it was snowing again. Winter didn't want to go away this year. The window was plastic and cold. He could feel the cold stench coming from beneath the frame. He looked at Rebecca. She was good-looking, with her brown hair in a ponytail. "You have his eyes, Rebecca, and a mole." "Mom told me," she smiled. At that moment, the doctor entered the room. "Rebecca needs to rest. You are already here at a bad time, so we will wait for you tomorrow." Hank obediently nodded and went out into the corridor, where Irvin was waiting for him. He leisurely started the motor and drove the boy back to the orphanage. But he was intercepted at the entrance by a tall, stout man. "You have kidnapped a child," he declared. A stout, fair-haired woman, with huge earrings and 100 rings on her hands, appeared from somewhere behind him. Not accustomed to tolerating rough treatment, Hank shoved the skinny guard aside like a puppy. "Hands off. I brought you a child. You don't watch the kids at all. I'm the one calling the police. Is that clear? And if I find out that you mistreat my grandson, I'll personally demolish your almshouse and I'll put every last one of you in jail. What if he was hit by a car?" The woman was frightened. "So, he's your grandson. I was told he has no relatives, only an alcoholic mother." "My mother doesn't drink." Irvin objected. "His mother doesn't drink, and soon Irvin will go back to her. Mark my words," said Hank, winked at the boy, and left. He knew he could not escape after this incident. So the next day he went straight to Rebecca. She was already lying in the general ward, and her tactful neighbor came out when she saw the visitor. "I have a lot of questions for you, but first you have to tell me why you were deprived of parental rights. Just be honest. I didn't come here to judge. I'll help you, even if it's an illegal drug or something worse." "You have to tell me what happened." Rebecca frowned. "What's worse? No way. It's nothing like that. My son has never seen me drunk, and no one has. I seldom drink or smoke. I've never taken any illegal substances. It's all about my father. I didn't go out with guys either. I was just a mouse. I fell in love for the first time at school, and he was from a rich family. He didn't notice me. But then I met him 5 years later. He was divorced, even more handsome. His family over the years had become one of the most influential in town. They own a clothing company. They supply the whole region with clothes. You must have heard their last name, the Johnsons. Harvey, my former classmate and their oldest son, when he met me, said I had changed since high school. So he started courting, said he was in love. His parents were against me from the beginning, and he even left home because they made him give me up. I saw that his feelings were real. He moved in with me. I got the apartment from my grandmother. My mom passed away when I was 18. It was an accident. She fell off her bike and hit her head. I was in session at the time, and she was visiting a friend in the country. I was shocked by the news and was depressed for a long time until I met Harvey. He helped me. With him, I started to live again. A year later, everything changed. His parents made things right with us. They pretended to accept me. I only found out later that they had signed over all the property to him, with one small amendment. Everything would go to his brother if he married me, or if we had a child together. I was documented out of his life. Yes, he could have just dated me, but we were already planning a wedding then. Harvey's parents said I wasn't a good match for his son. Besides, they were raising their own business from the ground up and have the right to choose who gets it. But I didn't have to. Harvey did. We started fighting. He said we could have it all. We could leave and no one would know we were still together. He and his brother had a long-standing feud, and if he had gotten everything, Harvey wouldn't have survived. His younger brother was a lousy sheep, a junkie, a drunk, but he still had a claim on his inheritance, and he was always picking on Harvey, teasing him, hurting him. They were enemies, even though they were related. That also played a part. Harvey would never give him the inheritance, and when he saw the document with the signatures and seals on it, he jumped at the opportunity hand and foot. We were getting ready to move in with him, but his parents were wiser. Yes, I didn't need a stamp in my passport, but when I found out I was pregnant, I wanted it all. The things that other people have. A normal family. I told Harvey about the baby, and he went to his head. I don't know who the baby's from. Let them prove it. And we won't get married if you don't want to, I said to calm him down. I didn't understand what the problem was. It was only on paper that we couldn't be a family. But in reality, there was nothing to stop us from doing that. You don't know everything. They made another point. My brother Teddy can contest the will, and believe me, he will. If you give me a child, he can sue me. If you refuse to do a paternity test, the court will consider it a concealment and the case will be decided in his favor. Then I lose everything. We lose everything. If the test proves the baby is mine, we lose everything. You and I have only one choice, he said. He was talking about the abortion, trying to convince me. I'm sorry, but I know another way out. I told him. I packed my things and left. But that didn't solve the problem. His parents made sure that neither I nor my child put their hand in his in their condition. They, on the other hand, thought that was all I wanted. Harvey came to see me several times while I was pregnant. He missed me and I chased him away. He gave me his word that he wouldn't let his parents know I was carrying his child, but he asked me to let him see the baby. I agreed. There was nothing wrong with a father seeing his son. I thought the situation would resolve itself over time. But time passed and nothing changed. Harvey came by once a month. He bought the child what he needed. I couldn't afford to stick my head up and refuse help. I wasn't working and I couldn't live on welfare. Irvin was sick a lot. When he turned 6, his brother Harvey came back to the country. His parents sent him to Germany for 5 years. He studied there, worked there, gained experience, and came back to, as it turned out, take his fortune from Harvey. He had at that time already married the person his parents had chosen for him. She was a pompous young lady 8 years older than him, but with money. Vovka often complained about her when he came to see me. He told me how stupid she was, how mercenary and superficial. He wasn't happy, but too much had already happened between us. I have fallen out of love with him for not giving up money for me and our son. I didn't need their money that much. We could have lived like everyone else, and his parents would have accepted his choice sooner or later anyway if he had had the courage to insist on it. But that's the way it was. My son saw his father once a week. sometimes once a month. He appeared in the papers with his wife, and I hid the pictures so Irvin wouldn't accidentally see them. I didn't know how to explain it all to him. One day, Harvey's brother Taylor showed up on my doorstep. He walked into my apartment and stared defiantly at the boy. "There's no need for a DNA test. I can see that your son looks like my mother," he said. Then he just smiled and left. I'd waited for Harvey to come to us. We never communicated over the phone. He managed to keep everything a secret, and for quite a long time. I don't know how Teely found out about all this. "Your brother came by," I said. Harvey was out of his mind, freaked out. "I told you to move to another town." "I did. Why are you so stupid? I'm screwed because of you." He came to get back at me, to take everything away from me. I didn't know what to say to him. I was sick of them fighting. I just wanted to live my life. Harvey left, and 24 hours later, Irvin's grandmother, Harvey's mother, Penelou, came to my doorstep. You probably don't know, but Teddy is my husband's child from his first marriage. Harvey is my blood son, and I will do everything I can to make sure he gets his inheritance. My husband runs everything, and you got dragged into this, but it's your own fault. We did everything we could to keep you two apart. You kept prying into our family. That's what you're gonna pay for. Your child will be taken away from you and raised somewhere else. And you'll tell Teddy that the baby wasn't yours. That you adopted him, but he was taken from you. He won't find it, and he can't prove anything. After that, they'll give the baby back to you. I wasn't asked. I was put before the fact. The next day, people came in and accused me of drinking, of driving men around. They opened the refrigerator, looked at the pile of food, the cooked meals, and said I wasn't feeding my son. They revoked my license very quickly. I was hysterical. But Irvin's mother told me that if I didn't tell Teddy what he wanted to hear, I wouldn't see my son again. I didn't even know where they took him, you know. When Teddy came, I showed him the fake adoption certificate, saying the baby wasn't mine. I showed him a document proving I had been deprived of my rights. He made copies and left, said he felt sorry for me, that he thought better of me. I was insulted, offended, embarrassed. A week later, unable to wait any longer, I went to Harvey's house and called his mother to talk. "You're taking a risk. Why did you come here?" "Teddy can see," she declared, and dragged me into the garage. We were talking there so Teddy wouldn't see. "Give me back my son. I have done everything. I'll leave here with him. Just bring him back." She shook her head. "I can't yet. Teddy has his own plans and he's watching you. I can only tell you where he is. If you visit, don't come here again. If you come back, you're on your own." I left her and she never came back. I waited every day for her to come. My job was not far from the orphanage where Irvin was placed, so I rented my apartment and moved out. My tenants know that if someone comes looking for me, you have to give them my address and number. I rented an apartment here, but I could only get a job as a sales clerk. That's where I was robbed at night and everything was taken. The owner of the store got mad that I couldn't get out. At the hospital, they told me to have a shot, and I didn't have any money. I felt really bad. I just laid down and waited for it to get better. I had no allowance now. Irvin started coming to see me here. Ran off. Brought me food, and I got worse and worse. For a week, I lay in a delirium and didn't know what to do, who to turn to. My son was taken from me. I was humiliated, accused of something that was not my fault. I was cheated, and she's not going to give me my baby back. It makes her feel better. Teely wouldn't find my son in an orphanage, but with me, wherever I was, she would find him. I didn't know what to do, so I just let fate take its course. I realize now that I was wrong, that I should have called the doctors, because I have Irvin and he needs me alive. Thank you for coming into my life and saving my life. That's what the doctors say. You were saved. It was counting on hours already. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't your mother come to me? I would have helped then and now. I wouldn't have hurt you. I would have stood up for you. Mom was ashamed to ask for help. She managed on her own, and I didn't know you at all. How could I come to your village and look for you from your picture and then say, I had a baby? Help me. I didn't have the conscience to do that. Hank shook his head. He came home that day and told Mary everything. Well, we should probably go to the police. Rebecca will testify that there is this contract. It's official paper. There is evidence that Rebecca doesn't drink and has a normal lifestyle. We can help her get her child rights back. The first thing Hank did was to contact the Veterans Council. He told his friends and co-workers the whole story. It turned out that many knew Rebecca's father, Iran, personally. We'll do what we can. We'll find resources. We only look like old men. But we have our own people everywhere, both in court and among lawyers. We'll take this case and get justice. These rich people always thought they could do anything. But there's also universal justice. I believe that with all my heart. Let's help our father's daughter. The process of restoring justice has begun. Hank took Rebecca to court, and she wrote a statement, told the whole story. The case promised to be a high-profile one, and they decided to close it immediately. Penelope went to court in person, but the judge turned her down. Because the Veterans Council was ready for such a thing, and the case was not just legal. They brought in journalists, high-ranking officials, military officials from other areas. They couldn't just scuttle everything, no matter what kind of bribe the Johnsons offered. However, Rebecca was forbidden to see her son. Harvey's mother managed to achieve this. She came to Rebecca to talk with her son. You went against us. Why did you do this? She asked, sitting across from the woman in the chair. Rebecca had just been released from the hospital. The trial was at a very early stage. You took my son away from me. I don't care who gets your millions. My child shouldn't have to suffer for it. And neither should I. I will take your child away from you without blinking an eye if you don't put out the fire you started. Teddy's out of the country, but he'll be back. He can't know we're lying to him. You know, it would have been easier just to steal your child and send him somewhere in the middle of nowhere so no one would find him. But I was merciful. I was just waiting for Teddy's position to become unshakable in my husband's corporation. You're ruining everything. You say you made it up. You're going to deny everything, okay? Otherwise, you'll never see your son again. Rebecca lifted her chin. We assumed you'd do that. The child is being monitored now. The Veterans Council won't let Irvin just disappear. We have our own people there. We have our own people everywhere. Just people who haven't forgotten what humanity is. Harvey got up from his seat. I'm going to file for paternity, and I'm going to take your son away from you. He's my child too. You shouldn't have gone against us, Rebecca. I'm sorry we have to go to extremes. Rebecca jumped up from her seat too. Try it. If it turns out you had a child with me, you're finished. You'll be left with nothing. And I'll get my good name back. The law in this country is on the side of mothers, isn't it? Kirill gets everything. Maybe I'll even make a deal with him, and he'll help me with Irvin to spite you. I help him, he helps me. Harvey threw a long stare at Rebecca and walked out, not hiding his dislike. His mother silently followed her son, leaving the door open as if she were disgusted to touch it. Rebecca closed the door behind her. She understood that this meeting was going to happen, and she was ready for it. The court hearings were difficult. Rebecca found many witnesses that she had never been immoral and had not used alcohol or illegal drugs. All the medical evidence was not in her favor. However, the Johnsons had a very strong lawyer. He was stonewalling them and giving them more and more arguments. At one crucial hearing, Irvin was invited into the courtroom. Rebecca could not hold back her tears. She had not seen him for the entire 3 months of the trial. Along with him was a woman from the orphanage who had been asked by the Veterans Council to look after the boy. She was from a military family, so she agreed to protect the child and report everything that went on inside. Fortunately, the Johnsons' family never attempted to kidnap the child or even adopt him. My mother never drank alcohol. She always took care of me and loved me, and they took me away from her, Irvin said. Suddenly he saw his daddy in the courtroom. And there's my daddy. He came to see me, but rarely, and forbade everyone to say I had a daddy, said the boy. Do you confirm that it was your daddy and that he was hiding you from everyone? The judge asked. That was the question Johnson's lawyer was questioning. Yes, you left me, and you left my mother. She almost died. I will never forgive you. Dads are supposed to help. He screamed and cried. Take the child away, said the judge. Let me at least give my mother a hug. While you're sticking around, she's not guilty of anything. And they took her away from me. They won't let her near me now, Irvin said loudly to the judge. And on what grounds is the mother not allowed to see the child? He asked. The women from Social Security mumbled something unintelligible, and the judge drew some conclusions for himself and marked something in his notebook. The court needed this because Harvey had decided to apply for adoption after all. It came as a shock to Rebecca. He had really decided to take her son away from her. Irvin was taken to Rebecca, and they sat hugging while the court questioned the other witnesses. Then the trial was moved to the next day. On the way out, as Irvin was being tearfully taken away from her mother and taken by car to the orphanage, Harvey came up to her. Forgive me, he said. Rebecca couldn't say anything. She just ignored him and walked away. The woman was unaware that her son's presence had caused a flurry of emotions from everyone in the room, and Harvey didn't hold back. In the evening, he and his mother had a serious conversation. The next day in court, the Johnsons' lawyer asked for the floor for Penelope. I would like to make a statement. My son will not claim paternity. I deny any claim and confirm that I did not personally witness Rebecca's mistreatment of my son. All of this was said by random witnesses who heard and saw something. It is probably not true, and it would be better for the boy to go back to his mother. She said that and left. The lawyer rolled up his cunning plan. Rebecca's good name was restored, and Irvin returned to her. Why had she done so? That question plagued everyone in the room that day. She did not take responsibility for bribing people to give false testimony against Rebecca. She cleverly twisted everything and walked away from the battlefield. Loser, I guess so. After the hearing, Rebecca approached her herself. Why? She asked. To greet her, to smile at her, would have been hypocritical. She only asked what she was interested in. Penelope lit a thin cigarette. Why did I let you win? She asked. Rebecca grinned. The case would have been settled in my favor anyway. You probably realized that and decided to save face. The DNA test that would have had to be done would have proved for sure that Irvin was Harvey's son. Contractually, a child by me disqualifies him from inheriting, doesn't it? Penelope grinned. Her dainty lips left a red mark on her thin cigarette. It's all about my son. Harvey has renounced his inheritance. He signed the document. Then he said he was divorcing his wife because he never loved her. Then he came over to my father and me and made a scandal like a little kid. He yelled that I was a schemer and told my husband things he shouldn't have known, how I helped Harvey get his inheritance and tried to hide your baby. He didn't know. He thought you were just a con artist trying to get our money. At least I managed to keep both Teddy and my husband in the dark. But Harvey blew it. He turned all my efforts to ashes and said he wouldn't claim to take the baby away. And if I got in your way or meddled in your life or your grandson's life, he'd kill himself. So, as you can see, he just cut off my oxygen. Rebecca was genuinely surprised by Harvey's action. Penelope, I never wanted your money. Understand that. And you shouldn't have separated us. You could have been a good grandmother to Irvin, and he could have had a full family. But money seems to be more important to you and all your scheming. Rebecca became bitter. She felt sorry for her frustrated mother-in-law. I am a follower of pure aristocracy. There were dukes in my family. No offense, honey, but a mongrel can't have a purebred puppy. It always depends on the mother. If she's from the back alley, the puppies will be the same. I don't think your puppy is my grandson, even if by blood it is. But we didn't even check that. Rebecca felt like slapping her in the face, but she held back. She had just proved in court that she was capable of being a good mother, and the fight with an elderly lady would hardly testify in her favor. I'm sorry for you, she said, and left. From that day on, her life began to be very different. For the first few days after she returned home, Irvin was never far from her mother. He clung to her with a deadly grip and would not let her go. He told her relentlessly about his life at the orphanage, about the good things and the bad things. The worst thing for a child is to be without the parent who is his support, his universe. Irvin believed that Mom would come back, that this was such a time in life. That's what she herself told him every day when she came to visit at the orphanage. Of course, she couldn't tell him everything. Even after the trial, she was silent about a lot of things. She only said that bad aunts and uncles wanted to separate them. But it did not work out because good Mary and Hank came into their lives in time. Mary finally got to know Alyona in person. During the trial, she supported her. Of course, Mary was much older and could easily have been her mother. In fact, that was exactly the feeling she got from Rebecca. Ever since the day the doubt had crept into her head that Irvin was Hank's own grandson, she had made up this legend, and she believed it. When Mary found out the truth, she was upset. She even cried about it, but Hank didn't show it. Even though she didn't have children, she so wanted her husband to experience this happiness. She realized that she would have been glad to know that he had cheated on her, and that a man had been born from this act of his. Hank, on the other hand, felt like a full-fledged father and grandfather. He even went to the local store where he had been going for years to argue with the boss who knew him personally and respected him. Rafik, there's talk, Hank said. The shopkeeper smiled broadly and walked over to his regular customer and buddy. Talk, brother, how can I help you? It was after the trial, when Irvin was already with his mother. He suddenly thought that Rafik was guilty and should, if not pay, at least learn about it. I had an army buddy. He was like family to me. Just recently, I found out he had a daughter and a grandson. He died, Rafik. He was defending our land, you and me. So this daughter had some trouble in her life, and she got a job at a grocery store. Brother, if you've got to get her a job, just say so, said the gentleman with a full mustache and grey in his temples and mustache. No, I don't have to. She got a job at the store and she got swindled. Can you imagine? She got beaten up and couldn't come in for her shift. And her boss was so mad at her about it, he wouldn't pay her for 3 weeks and told her not to come back. Can you believe that? Rafik's face changed. Brother, he stretched out. Are you talking about the girl who used to work for me? Am I the boss who didn't give you the money? Hank nodded and looked into his eyes. There was shame and remorse in them. Brother, it was my fault. I bought a ticket at the time, and I wanted to go on vacation with my family. And then they told me that the new girl couldn't come out, that she would be gone for a long time. She couldn't get sick leave because she worked for me unofficially, and she didn't think to take a certificate. I yelled at her and stayed to work myself. My wife flew away with a friend. She took her instead of me. I was ashamed, but I didn't call her back. I thought that her salary would be my compensation for moral damages. I didn't know she was your friend's daughter. I'm sorry. Hank didn't know what to say. Rafik had told him everything frankly. He was a very fair man, but why he had acted so badly this time, who knew? Probably just because he was human. You didn't pay her, Hank, and she got beaten up badly and took the last of it. She couldn't pay for the x-rays, and she almost died because of it. Rafik covered his mouth with his hand and backed away. What have I done, brother? I'm sorry. Let her come. I'll make it up to her. I swear I didn't know. I thought she was a young girl. I guess she was out for a walk, so I punished her. I didn't know it was like that. Hank shook his head and left without a word. And the next day, Vanechka came running in and said that Mom was urgently calling for Hank and Mary to come over. What happened? Mary did not understand. There is such a thing. You need to see it, said he. They went up to the 5th floor and saw that Rebecca's apartment was filled with all kinds of things. As an apology, Rafik brought her several boxes of fruit, a huge bouquet of flowers, children's toys, and all the sweets she could find. He also delivered her all sorts of groceries, from green peas and sausage to herrings and expensive red fish. There were several bottles of wine, the best kind. He almost brought the whole store to her feet to make her forgive him. You could have set a huge table for 20 people. Wow! Where'd you get that from? Mary marveled. Rebecca smiled. And Rafik came to apologize. You spoke to him, didn't you? She asked, looking at Hank with a smile. Well, I did, but I didn't expect such a thing. Hank laughed as he watched Irvin choose which cookie to eat next. There were more than a dozen varieties in the little boxes. The boy looked at each one with curiosity. Some he opened and tasted. He was kneeling right in my house, right there on the mat. I was so confused. He explained to me that I had ruined his trip, and he repented, and he asked me to put in a good word for him with you. It's important to him that you don't hold it against him. So here's my word. Come taste all this stuff. We just can't eat that much by ourselves. They sat down at the table and had a bite to eat. In the evening, Rebecca made a delicious dinner of groceries and invited her favorite downstairs neighbors over again. They sampled wine, roasted chicken, and went their separate ways. Rebecca found herself a job. Rafik had many friends and acquaintances, and he got her a job at a children's entertainment center as an animator. She went around all day dressed as different princesses and delighted the children. Performances were held frequently. Parents would come to the children's center with their kids and sometimes leave them, and Rebecca would watch and help the educators. She enjoyed her work and knew that this was her calling. She loved children madly, and after she got Irvin back, that love only grew stronger. Now all that's left is for you to find a fiancé, smiled Mary, who had become like a second mother to her. Come on, who needs me with a child? Rebecca sighed. She was indeed faced with a very unpleasant circumstance. Many men, having learned that she was a single mother, began to treat her differently. And she was so used to it that she had no hope of finding someone suitable until the opportunity presented itself. A new animator came to their children's entertainment center. He was 5 years younger than Rebecca. He was cute, and the children just loved him. Rebecca welcomed him warmly, but did not even look at him as a man. The handsome animator's name was Fred. Shall we go out tonight? He asked. Rebecca smiled indulgently. Sorry, I need to study with my son. He's a schoolboy now, she answered. Wow, so introduce us. He'll like me, I promise, he said. Rebecca tactfully turned him down every time, thinking Fred was a child. She was already 27 and he was only 22. Rebecca knew he was living with his parents, that he was graduating. An entire year had passed in his attempts to capture the heart of the beautiful Malvina and the equally beautiful Elsa from the cartoon Cold Heart. After all, it was these characters that she dressed up most often. Rebecca, Irvin, and I were waiting for you, she heard behind her back. Hank and Irvin came into her office. He and Mary were so attached to the boy that they picked him up from school and asked in all seriousness to call them Grandma and Grandpa. But Irvin stubbornly called them by their first names. That's the way he got used to it from the beginning. Rebecca loved that the boy would have such caring grandparents. She was fond of them herself and was in awe of them. They were the closest thing she had to family. Good afternoon. Fred in his superhero costume flew up to them. Wow, you're real, aren't you? Irvin's eyes lit up and he smiled. Of course I am. So are you. You're real, aren't you? Fred asked. He was a great actor and at the time had already graduated from the theatre department at the College of Culture. He talked to the boy while Hank went to the bathroom. Then Rebecca and Hank came out and took Irvin home. However, he talked about Fred all day and asked his mother to take him to see him again. The next day Fred said just one phrase that tipped the scales in his favor. On the one hand, Rebecca was afraid to get involved with men after Harvey, and Fred seemed small and unserious to her. On the other hand, she knew she was still young, and Irvin needed a father. Besides, Fred also seemed nice to her, and everyone at work knew that he was madly in love with her. Your son is just the best dude ever. Now I understand why you're blowing me off. You're like a stone wall behind him, he said, smiled, and went to change. Rebecca froze in place. The best praise for any mother is the praise addressed to her child. Fred, don't you want to come and visit us? Irvin asks about you all the time. You can wear a suit, or you can wear regular clothes, whatever you want. Fred made a serious face, as if thinking. Sure, I'll wear the costume he liked. Kids have to believe in their heroes. So he came to them that night and stayed until almost midnight. Only then did Irvin fall asleep, finishing with his superhero, a superhero movie. Fred deftly commented on what was going to happen in the next moment, as if he really was a superhero and had been there and it was all real. And Irvin listened with his mouth open, believing and enthralled. When he fell asleep, Fred got up quietly and went to get dressed. Are you going out? Rebecca asked. She expected him to pester her, since he had sought her attention for so long. Superhero has to go, but he'll be back if you don't mind. I don't mind, Rebecca said. What, not even a kiss? She thought. I'm not going to push you, just know that I'm going to sleep happy tonight. He told her and closed the door behind him. A moment later, however, he knocked softly on it. Rebecca didn't have time to leave. She was still standing in the hallway, thinking over everything she was feeling and what had happened today. I forgot something, he said, peeking out the door. He walked back into the apartment and hugged and kissed Rebecca the way a real superhero would do. She even got dizzy with delight. Of course, she cringed in his strong arms and kissed him too. Well, that's it. I have to go, beautiful, he said and left. Fred later confessed that he almost died of fright when he kissed her. There too, he turned on the acting and pretended to be a superhero to make himself less nervous. And at first he chickened out and left, but then he forced himself to come back. That evening began their relationship. Fred wooed very nicely. On their next date, they went without costumes. They just walked around the park, sat in an outdoor cafe and talked. Who are your parents? Rebecca asked. My mother is a speech therapist and my father works as a welder. We're not starry-eyed, but we're friendly. I only recently moved out because I realized I wanted to start a life of my own, but we always understood each other well. Rebecca exhaled. Things were different with the last boyfriend, and the parents were different, and so were the relationships in the family. Fred invited her home a couple of weeks after the first meeting. He invited her home with the baby, insisted on it. Mom, Dad, meet my sweetheart and her son, he said, and the woman behind him smiled. Fred's father also smiled and held the cat in his arms. It was a beautiful encounter. Fred's parents were so cheerful, and it didn't embarrass them one bit that Rebecca had a child. Fred himself always said that a son was a joy, not a burden, and those men who consider children a nuisance will treat their own that way too, and most likely become a big nuisance themselves. Soon Fred and Rebecca were married. Only family members were at the wedding. Rebecca invited Mary and Hank. Fred's parents and his sister were also there. A year later they had another child, a girl. Her name was Sophia. Rebecca entrusted the name to the man whom she loved like a father, who saved her life and without whom she could not imagine her life anymore, Hank. He came to the maternity hospital, picked up the baby in his arms, and almost cried. Big brutal Hank realized that he had just become a grandfather for the second time, and it didn't matter what the blood was. It's not blood that decides who your family is, it's love. Let Sophia be the winner in life, he said. Later, Hank and Mary became Sophia's godparents.